Hello, I'm Sylvia Nagisako, professor of anthropology and co-director of the Center for Global Ethnography at Stanford University. Today, I'm speaking with Professor Sarah Pink, who is director of the Emerging Technologies Research Lab at Monash University. In this interview, we talk about Professor Pink's use of video ethnographic methods and a number of other methods she's used to conduct ethnographic research remotely. We're really very interested in knowing how you've used digital tools for ethnographic research.
Yes, well, that's been one of the main themes in my whole career. And I did a master's degree in visual anthropology at the University of Manchester very early on. And that I was already interested in the use of photography and video in research, but that really shaped the way I developed my ethnographic practice throughout my whole career. And for me, becoming ethnographic documentary filmmaker wasn't necessarily my ambition. I wanted to become an anthropologist, but I wanted to take that learning and to take those ethnographic documentary skills into my practice as an ethnographer. And I have had the opportunity to do that across the whole range of projects, particularly since the late 1990s, where I started to develop video ethnography methods, particularly with people living in their homes, so doing ethnographies of everyday life in the home, but also urban ethnographies, ethnographies of cycling, of commuting. And so I've developed those methods across the whole range of different kind of research questions and research sites, and of course, various different countries as well. And I think for me, video facilitates so many kind of additional and important elements of a research process. It can be used in long-term traditional ethnographic fieldwork, but it also can be a really profitable and beneficial part of shorter-term fieldwork, where we have to, by necessity, engage with research participants for a much shorter period of time, which may be related to the timescales of projects, but it might also be related to the amount of time that they can actually give us and the places and the particular sites and contexts in which you're working with us. So I see video as being part of a quite intense encounter. But importantly, I see it as a mode of getting under the surface of everyday life experience, which is very different from conventional participant observation. So for me, when I work with video, I'm not trying to objectively record what's happening in front of the camera. And I've never really thought of it that way. I think going back to the ethnographic kind of documentary technique, it's about being in there, with the participants, part of the action, and understanding that myself and the camera is actually being part of that, becoming part of the everyday world, which I'm investigating as I work with the camera and as I work with the participants.
Can you say something, since you've been doing this video ethnography, what kind of video equipment you've been using?
Yes, the equipment that I've been using has evolved over the years. So of course I learned how to make ethnographic documentaries using VHS and SVHS video at the end of the 1980s. But since then, I think the most interesting evolution in video camcorders in particular has been the fold-out screen, which came along around the late 1990s, which enabled us to actually have a very different view. So you weren't then viewing the research participants through the viewfinder, you were actually viewing them through the fold-out screen, which meant you could still maintain eye contact, and you had a kind of double vision of what you were recording, but also the wider environment in which you were actually recording and what was going on around you. I think that for me also goes back to an essential aspect of working with video ethnographically for me, is that you're not just, the video recording should never be thought of as simply what you're observing through the camera lens. It, in a sense, kind of pulls with it that whole embodied experience and the sensorial experience of being in a research encounter. Which is, again, why I say that we shouldn't think of video recording as simply being observational. It's actually part of the process of ethnographic sensing and ethnographic note-taking, kind of pulls together that being there in the field with our experience as ethnographers, and the way that we can then use those videos to, in a sense, enable us to feel that sense of being in the field again, albeit differently, because we would have then moved forward in certain ways.
have you used anything like iPhones? I'm just thinking about things that, lots of people will have just on hand in
Mhm.
the field that they might not necessarily have special equipment. Have you ever tried some of that?
Yes, I have used a smartphone, but I would only usually use a smartphone if I didn't have another camera with me. So I haven't intentionally gone out to do smartphone ethnography. Nevertheless, I know that other researchers have. Smartphones produce excellent images. And yeah, I think it's a very viable approach to doing ethnography, especially if you're in situations where you don't want to carry kind of more professional and bigger equipment with you. And obviously, you can also use the iPhone for photos and for audio recording and you can easily share any video clip you make of a research participant with them immediately from an iPhone as well, which I think, in terms of kind of creating that confidence and trust and those kinds of modes of sharing with research participants, it's yeah, a really, really interesting mode of working.
Is there any particular way in which you introduce your video recording or smartphone recording um, to address those issues of trust and among your informants? Is there a way you would use this after having spent some time with them, or how do you usually set that up?
Very often in the projects that I do, the research participants know that we want to use video before we ever meet them. And I would usually, sometimes they're not sure because there are always other options. It's not always necessary for us to video record when I work with participants in field work. But there are various ways that I think you can engender people's trust. And one thing that I've used for a very long time now is a quite layered mode of informed consent. So obviously we go through our university ethical approval procedures, which require us to gain informed consent. But for me, it goes beyond that. So I ask participants to go through a quite layered process where they think about what they would like the video recordings to be shown to use within our research team, if they would allow us to show them in presentations, if they would allow us to show them online, if they would allow us to use video stills in publications, and invite them to think about all those different possibilities, also in relation to their own anonymity, if they would otherwise, prefer to remain anonymous. I also invite them to give me their email addresses so that I can contact them if they would actually like to see any clips and view them before they're used or shown anywhere as well. So at the very least, we use that kind of informed consent form. We also, in one project in particular, actually sent the participants DVDs with all of their video recordings on, and invited them to watch them and to alert us to any parts of the video they'd like to have deleted, and also invited them to view all of the uses we made of their videos. And I think obviously longer term projects and developing deeper relationships with the participants means that they're likely to kind of understand better the project and your motivation.
Are there any ways you can think of that a researcher might actually use, video ethnography, even if they're not present? We're dealing with this
Mhm.
situation now where we're trying to figure out what particular methods we can use
Yeah.
remotely. Is that something that you've ever used, but actually asking people to set up a webcam or turn on their
Mhm.
smartphone?
Yeah, I think I'd start somewhere else actually, because I've actually been working remotely for over 7 years now. I moved to Australia in 2012, and I still had ongoing projects, video projects in the UK. So during that time, I worked with Kirsten Leader-Mackley, who is a research fellow on one of my projects, and she produced video, and we shared that video, we analysed it together, and we continued to work together at distance. So I think what I learned from that kind of project is that as a researcher, when you're engaged in the ethnographic process with a co-researcher, you maybe designed the project, or you participated in some of the ethnography, it's very easy to feel yourself into the video materials that a co-researcher will produce. To the point where sometimes there's one video in particular that I watch, and sometimes I forget that it wasn't me who filmed it because I've watched it so many times, but also because we worked in a very synchronized way. But I know really that Kirsten did film it. So there's one aspect of this is that video can work very, very well in ethnographic teamwork. And that can mean that you can work all over the world with teams of ethnographers who are producing materials in different places. But on the other hand, of course, in this particular context that we're in now, then we can't have ethnographers kind of out there even doing the field work ourselves. Now, obviously that does present challenges. I think it presents particular challenges for people whose expectations were that that's what they were going to do. But in various other projects, there have been specific reasons why we've asked the participants to produce the videos themselves. So one project was actually in Melbourne. It's a project that my colleague Shanti Sumatayo worked on with me here, and we decided to do a research project looking at cycling commuters in Melbourne, and also two of our colleagues also worked on a part of the project with us in Canberra. So again, we were working remotely and sharing materials across our team, but also we realised that we wouldn't be able to cycle with the cycling commuters. Some of them were going very fast, and also some of them had really long commutes. So we asked them to wear GoPros while they cycled. And there's another reason why we asked them to wear GoPros, because we were also particularly interested in self-tracking. So if they were using some of the various wristbands and other tracking apps and technologies and apps while they were cycling. So we hoped that when they stopped to check their technologies, the self-tracking technologies would also catch that on the GoPro. So in this project, we gave them the GoPros. They recorded their preparations for cycling. They recorded their whole commute, and they also recorded their arrivals. And then they gave the GoPros back. We analysed the materials and then also viewed them again with the participants to gain understandings based on what we'd viewed and what we viewed with them. So that was our way into the experience of cycle commuting and self-tracking cycle commuting with those participants. And that for us, that was the only way we could actually get into the sensory and kind of affective worlds in which they cycled. Now, we did do some of that work face to face, but we didn't necessarily need to. We could very well have just had the GoPros delivered and then had them sent back and then done a screen sharing post recording interview with them and then recorded that online as well. Similarly, a couple of years ago, I was involved in two projects in Brazil, working with colleagues at the Federal University of Pernambuco and Samsung Institute. And there we also did some research about people's everyday morning routines in their homes and also their commutes. And again, in that project, many of the participants self-documented those experiences because it was very impractical for the researchers to travel with, and sometimes it was just inappropriate and maybe wouldn't have been safe. And some of the commutes across big Brazilian megacities, were at least 2 hours. So it was really impractical for the researcher to travel over to the participant's place as well. So that enabled us to record with the participant the whole journey of when people danced in their car, when they communicated with others when they were driving, and then to again be able to interview them about those videos. So again, another example of a project that could perfectly well be developed online.
Well, that's fascinating. I really appreciate the combination of participant observation you're able to do remotely, but also to interview people about their experience after that. So that seems like a really useful combination. Yeah. Can you say something about how the particular methods that you've used, either remotely or the video recordings, have shaped the kind of research questions you have been able to ask and the findings that you have arrived at?
Yes, I think when I design an ethnographic project, then I'll always have a set of research questions, which will be contingent perhaps on if I'm working with an external research partner. Quite a few of my projects are connected with industry partners or with academics from other disciplines. So we often have shared questions that you might not usually ask as a kind of more classical anthropologist. But we also have those research findings or questions that emerge during the process. And I've recently started to refer to what I call the ethnographic hunch, which is a research finding that emerges maybe in your first 2 encounters with the participants in the research. And then you follow that hunch through the whole project. And I guess most anthropologists who've done fieldwork will know exactly what I'm talking about, because but I found it useful to call it something, to actually put a name on that process, because I think we're often so our methods of analysis and interpretation are often seen as kind of so mysterious and difficult for other people from other disciplines to kind of to understand and to know where our ideas and our kind of concepts come from. So for me, it's always a mix, kind of bringing together the question of what we thought we wanted to know and what we really can know through research.
So thinking about the current situation, and we have quite a few graduate students who are just starting to embark on their
Mm.
research projects and faced with a at least immediate future in which they're going to have to be figuring out how to do some of this remotely and using digital methods. Do you have any suggestions for ways in which they might start to approach their projects using digital methods, especially for those who are not necessarily going to be focused on media-centric research?
Mhm. Yes, and I think that research, yeah, doesn't have to be focused on questions around technology and media for us to be able to use technology and media to be able to do our field work. Although I guess that in the current context, I think we just always need to be super attentive to the roles that media are playing in our lives, but without making those media-centric projects. And I guess I would also say that most of my media-focused research has been non-media-centric, and that has been at the core, actually, of my message. I think for any PhD student who's doing a research project that is about media, if you try to decenter the media, then you probably find out what you really need to find out. I'll mention a couple of projects that I'm involved in, where we've actually had to confront some of those issues already. So one project is a project that we're developing in Sweden, and the project started a while ago. We were planning to do face-to-face ethnography. In that project, I was planning to do face-to-face ethnography in Sweden. Obviously, I haven't been able to leave Australia. The project's called Design Ethnographic Living Labs for Future Urban Mobility. And it's funded by an organisation called Drive Sweden. For that project, then, our ethnographic team, and I should give particular credit to the research fellows who are involved in that work in Sweden. So they couldn't get out there to do the interviews. So they've developed a really interesting ethnographic research pack, which they've sent out to the participants and have tested and now with some interviews. And it contains, various kind of instructions for activities and a diary that they ask the participants to keep. And they've also managed to produce excellent interviews using the Microsoft Teams platform. So there are many platforms that we can use, be it Zoom, which everybody seems to be using for online teaching at the moment, or the platform that kind of best suits you and the work you want to do. So that's one example of a project that's really, just adapted to online for the moment, but with the idea that we hope to be able to do face-to-face interviews later. Another project we actually had already started, and very luckily we had done video ethnography field work with about 10, 15 participants in their homes already. And this project is called Intelligent Home Solutions for Independent Living, and we're working there with a not-for-profit organisation called McLean Care. And it's a Department of Health funded project that seeks to understand how older people are using how they engage with smart home technologies in their home. So for us, it's quite an exciting project because it's very experimental for us as well, for me as an anthropologist, and that the smart home technologies have been installed in the older people's homes. And we're interested in how they engage with them, but really kind of looking at that deeply and ethnographically to see how they kind of appropriate them into their lives, how they might play with them, and how they can actually make them become part of their worlds and meaningful to them or not. So in that project, we did video ethnography with the people in their homes. So we were able to film them using the technology, showing us around their homes, and to really kind of get that in-depth sensorial and kind of intimate kind of series of conversations and performances of how people do things with technology. I mean, the performative aspect of video ethnography is very important for me. And then suddenly, you know, the COVID-19 crisis began, and we realised that because we're dealing, you know, with an older age group, we won't be able to go back and do field work with them at all during the period of our project. So we've had to find other ways to continue to the work. But fortunately, because we've already got the videos, but I think this would hold for any videos, even if the participants had produced the videos, because we've got the videos, then we actually know what their homes look like. So my colleague who did the first round of follow-up interviews was actually able to talk to their participants about their homes and what they were doing in them and how they felt with that visual and kind of spatial and sensory understanding of what it was like to be there. And as we move on in that project, then we'll try to use FaceTime and other video conferencing techniques if we can, depending very much on the participants and what they're interested in and able and willing to use. So those are two projects. And the final project is a brand new project that I'm involved in. And this is an ESRC, Economic and Social Research Council funded project in the UK. And I'm working on that project with Harry Ferguson, who's a professor of social work. And this project is called Social Work and Social Distancing. And the subtitle is Learning from the Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic on Child Protection Service Users and the Capacity to Keep Children Safe, which is a long title, but it expresses what the project is about. And so both of us, both co-investigators, have been incredibly interested in the sensorial experience of home, the sensory home, and particularly in the context of social work research. Harry's work had focused, and it was work I'd always really admired actually, had focused on the sensorial kind of ways of knowing that social workers kind of engage in as they go into the service users' homes. And the being there and the whole kind of emotional sensory experience and how that works as part of social work. But obviously, once the pandemic started, then people who care for other people in their homes, people who go into other homes and other kind of modes of work, their work practices have had to shift dramatically because they actually haven't been able to do home visits. So we learned that social workers had actually started to use video conferencing or other kind of apps to be able to contact service users in their homes, but they hadn't actually been able to do those sensory visits. So then that presented a big question of how is that actually impacting on their practice and on their ability to keep children safe. And also, as they were working from home, undertaking these roles, also what difficulties were they encountering in terms of having to shift their workspace into their own homes. So that's a project that we're actually having to do completely online at the moment. So we're doing online research with people who themselves have had to start working online as well. So in that project, we're now kind of working out the different ways that we can use different platforms and different camera and video technologies with those participants in order to be able to kind of gain those deep sensory understandings of their experiences and a sense of how their work practices are shifting and changing and what the impact of that is. So, I mean, so that was a fantastic opportunity really to design a project that was a product of the pandemic and that would actually need to engage with the context of the pandemic as its fieldwork sites on those multiple levels.
That's really very useful. These examples, the specific examples that you've given us are really have great information in there. And I'm sure that this is going to generate a lot of questions that graduate students and others will want to ask you during the live question and answer event that we're going to be having soon. So thank you so much for this.
Could I just add one other thing about video, which is that you should never think of, and especially I think when we're working in these online contexts and creating kind of online research environments, we should never think of the video as something that's given to us and that then we take away. We should always think of that as a shared material with our research participants, and then even more so in this kind of context of working online, and to use maybe the video as the core, but then to continue that conversation and that dynamic using whichever kind of social media platforms or modes of connection that can keep us connected.
That's really, really useful. I really like the idea. I've been talking to some students about the ways in which the particular situation we're in now presents some interesting opportunities to actually have more intimate participant observation with some of our, the people we study than we might have otherwise, because I think that there are some people who will let you into their home through video or through a smartphone that you might not otherwise have been able to have access to otherwise.
Yes, and I agree that, video before that for me also always created a very intimate kind of research encounter. And it's also an encounter in which the research participants very often will show me things. Because they know what video is for. So the encounter always becomes, I think, more performative than it would do if it's simply a face-to-face chat. Maybe face-to-face, you're performative in different ways. But I think that performative dimension is really important, and recording those types of performances and the places in their homes that people will take you, the things that they will show you, is a really kind of also fascinating exploration of the materiality of home and the meaning of home and the feelings that are associated with different aspects of home.